Tell me a fact and I'll learn. Tell me a truth and I'll believe. But tell me a story and it will live in my heart forever. The Names Not Numbers Oral History Film Documentary Project is remembering the stories of the Holocaust and is telling the story of the Holocaust for the world to hear, for the world to learn, and to inspire future generations to combat anti-Semitism and all forms of hatred and intolerance. This unique project is in its 16th year. Over 2,500 survivors and 6,000 students have participated in it worldwide. The students were instructed by teachers and professionals. They learned interviewing techniques from journalists. They learned filming techniques and editing skills from documentary filmmakers. The students interviewed, filmed, and edited the 2-hour interviews with each survivor to make 20-minute oral histories that are compiled in the Names Not Numbers documentary at the school. You're about to view the documentary Names Not Numbers, a movie in the making. This film chronicles the students as they are being trained by the professionals and includes their reflections. In it is embedded approximately 10 minutes from each interview. This is the students' work. They're filmed and edited interviews. Through this project, our students are preserving history, and they are the witnesses to the witnesses.
I heard on the radio that Hitler was coming to Vienna, and I wanted to be part and parcel of the crowd of over 100,000 people or so, shouting and screaming, one people, one empire, one leader. And when I did return home, my mother was furious. She wanted to know, where in the heck have you been? And I said to her proudly, I saw our Führer. And Mother slapped me left and right and said, he is not ours, and don't you ever forget it.
If you're learning about the Holocaust, it makes it more meaningful, and you're able to really see what people went through if you're able to interview a survivor.
My father started saying, Hitler is a scourge. He wants to take over the world. He wants to control. And 2 Nazis grabbed him by the collar, took him into their Mercedes, and drove away with him. And they said, listen, your family was very kind to us. Young man, these are dangerous times. Never mention the name of Hitler again. And they let him go. But then he saw the handwriting on the wall, that things aren't quiet and things are never going to be the same again.
I think it was so amazing to be able to talk to a survivor in person, and you could really connect with them and understand their point of view.
When the Nazis came in 1939, there was fire coming out of the skies. There were bombs. People were running and screaming, dying, not knowing where we're going. It was total bedlam.
These are not numbers, these are names, these are real people, real stories that happened, and we should remember that.
Everyone has a name, and then if you just give them a number instead of a name, then you're basically taking away their right to be human.
The first thing we noticed, all of us, when we saw it, when we got off the train, was a sign, Arbeit macht frei, work frees you. It makes you free, which we understood, but not the right way.
We're not always going to have this chance to interview people and to learn about the Holocaust first person like we are now. And I think it's a really amazing experience for everyone to be able to watch this in the future and just reflect on things of the past.
Eighth graders, you are about to embark on an incredible, impactful journey. Through the Names Not Numbers program, you're going to have the opportunity to interview actual survivors. You're going to produce a professional quality documentary. You are going to hear the survivors' stories straight from their mouths. Not everybody is given that opportunity. There are millions of people who will never sit in a room with a survivor. Your children will never have that opportunity.
When we study these parts of our history, it's not just history. It's not these far-off things that we can't really relate to or don't really resonate. This is about our family. It's about our grandparents and great-grandparents. It's about things that our families actually went through. It's things that we carry with us on Yom HaShoah. It's things that we bring forward to our children until the story's over.
You each have the responsibility to keep these stories of these survivors alive for future generations, so that none of us ever forget the stories that you're about to hear.
This is an opportunity that hopefully you will carry with you and give the message of what hate can do, and to give the message of Zol Zayin Mensch, that through it all, our mantra is to make sure that we are good people, that we bring goodness and kindness into the world to counteract the hate. So I really want to congratulate you on this incredible opportunity, and I hope that you will take it seriously as it goes from opportunity to your responsibility.
When living history becomes a memory, it will be you, the students who participated in Names Not Numbers. Through your documentary, you will remember the days of old, Zachor Yemot Olam. The survivors and the students are telling the story of the Holocaust for the world to hear, for the world to learn, and to inspire future generations to combat anti-Semitism and all forms of hatred and intolerance. Our Names Not Numbers students are learning history, recording history, and preserving history through their work.
In the video with Tova Rosenberg, she talked about how several generations on, and like our kids and their grandkids, they're not going to see the Holocaust survivors, and it's our responsibility to do this to show other people what it was like, because they're not going to have that experience that we are.
It's an incredible opportunity to be able to be the last generation to interview survivors, to learn about their different perspectives about the Holocaust.
One of my great-grandfather is still alive right now, who survived the Holocaust. I think my great-grandfather will be very proud and happy that I'm learning about other people's past and his, because I'm continuing his story and I'm not just letting it go.
I didn't really know how serious this really was, and then everything started happening, and the filming people came in, and it all started to hit me, and I was like, wow, this is really cool that we get to do this.
We watched one of the completed interviews from years past from one of the survivors, Moshe Avital, just to see how it would come out finished.
My name is Moshe Avital. Up until the war, everybody was living peacefully. The Jews had a very good life. Under the surface, there was anti-Semitism, but they didn't show it really.
The final product of the video, I thought it was really nice, so it's a lot of expectations that we need to live up to, but look forward to doing it.
The most important thing to remember is an interview should be a conversation when it's done well. So preparation is key. You want to have some sense of how you want the conversation to go. Knowing how to listen is the least appreciated, most important thing you can do in any conversation, but especially for this. These are chronological interviews. Think about the story they're telling. How do you keep the story moving? And how do you connect one detail to another?
One thing I learned from Mr. Driesen was that when we're asking questions during the interview, we should, rather than just paying attention to the questions that we have written down, we should listen to what they're saying and ask questions about that and make them more specific to their actual story.
Details are key, right? What makes the story so powerful isn't a person saying, I lost my parents, right? It's a person saying every part of what led to the loss of the people they loved. And you need those details, right? You need to ask as best you can what they remember of what they said, what they remember of what they wore, what they remember of the last moments.
I think the hardest part of this process was figuring out how to word the questions so we could get the best answer, because they don't want us asking questions, they want to hear her telling the story.
Anything that you think could tell the story in a deeper and richer way is what you need to ask for. You're asking them to relive trauma, right? These are horrors none of us can imagine. And so if they cry, it's not your fault, right? Don't feel guilt. You're not doing something bad by having them retell their story. They want to do it because of what it means to them. You're in some ways doing a kindness for the person because you're honoring what it is they say and you're honoring the memory of who they loved.
When you interview a survivor, you can ask them questions, you can really connect with them more than when you're reading a book. You can express a lot through reading and writing, but you can't actually show all of your feelings. So when you interview someone, you get to see like their facial expressions, their body language, along with their words. So it's really powerful to see like, oh, this is a person and this happened, rather than reading it in a book and just reading the words.
Interviewing a survivor shows what they were going through and their emotions, and every story is different.
You really hear them saying it, and it hits differently.
This is not just a story. This is what happened to literally our forefathers, our grandparents, great-grandparents. And if we don't remember where we came from, we won't be able to learn about our background, our family, our culture, about everything.
We're going to go through the type of angles that we use for this interview in particular. We want the audience to feel like they're actually talking to the survivor, right? So we want the height of the camera to be eye level. This is a medium shot, okay? It's showing half of their body and their face, okay? Now, what do you think a close-up is?
Just their face.
Just their face, yeah. It's going to look something like this.
I was very excited because I like cameras, so I was very excited to work with professional grade cameras.
To prepare for this interview, Mr. Kettner assigned us assignments to start knowing about our person and making questions, and I think that really helped.
This is the first time that I'm going to be able to meet a Holocaust survivor, and probably one of the last time for our generation. And it makes me feel a little bit nervous, but also excited because I get to learn more about their experience in the Holocaust, and I can ask them questions.
I am feeling excited to hear about Mrs. Cohen's story and learn more about the Holocaust.
I'm feeling a little nervous, but very prepared.
One question that I'm looking forward to asking the most is asking Mrs. Peabody how she kept her faith through the hardest times that she had.
I'm looking forward to interviewing people and seeing what they have to say about it, because it's good for people to spread the word, and people in 1st and 2nd grade, they're going to be listening to our tapes, so we have to make sure that we do it perfectly.
I'm Rubenstein, and I'm very, very glad to be here today and to tell you my story. Nice to meet you.
The best part of the day.
One, two. Hi, I'm Daisy Muzzin. Thank you for coming.
I'm great, welcome.
My name is Peter Fido. I was born on March the 1st, 1929 in Berlin, Germany. Before the war, life was good for me. It was exciting for me to travel, and I really enjoyed my early years. We did not celebrate any Jewish holidays. At Christmas time, there was always a Christmas tree. As a 6-year-old, without any religious background myself, I was taught to hate Jews. I was unaware, of course, at that time that I was considered Jewish. After the Nuremberg laws that were passed in 1935, we spent about 6 months, 7 months in Prague, Czechoslovakia, and then my father was transferred to Vienna, his hometown. My parents at that point did have me baptized. Things went well until about 1938, in March of 38, when Austria was annexed by Germany.
My name is Halina Yasharow Peabody. I was born in Krakow, Poland on January 12, 1933. My mother was a champion swimmer. My father was a dentist. My favorite memories is my mother teaching me how to ski and to skate. And she taught me embroidery and knitting. All our things at home were made by her. We were not observant, and I didn't know much about being Jewish. The only thing I remember was that when I was going to kindergarten, my father told me that I was going to go to Sunday school to learn Hebrew. And we lived in a small town. My father was very much involved with the dental work for all the farmers there. He did a lot of pro bono work. And I never really thought that there was anything wrong with being Jewish, no.
You can begin in 3, 2, 1.
Can you please tell me your name?
In Hebrew, Chaya Krakauer. In English, Ellen Krakauer. I was born June the 7th, 1936, in Poland, a place called Wyszków, the suburb of Warsaw. My father, my mother, my brother, and I. My father had a small fruit store.
Did you or your family experience any anti-Semitism before the war?
My parents must have, because there's a very clear division between the Poles and the Jews. So they must have known quite a bit about anti-Semitism. I was just too young to pick up on it.
My name is Rita Rubenstein. I was born on December the 12th, 1936. I was born in Romania, in Vașcovăț. I came from a very loving, pious family. My father had a dry goods store, and they wove native costumes for the Ukrainians. My mother was in the store selling the goods, and I had a nanny. I had friends, I was played in the streets, dolls. It was a wonderful, wonderful life. I didn't have this wonderful life very long. When I was 4 years old, the Russians came into our area, and they conscripted all the young men into the army. And so they took, my father was one of them, and the last time I saw him was when I was 4, not knowing, and we said goodbye.
My name is Judith Goldman. I was born January 3rd, 1941, in Lodz, Poland. My mother spoke 6 languages. My father spoke about 7 or 8. They were incredible people. They had this big estate, and they sent logs for furniture production. They had a water mill that everybody would come and thresh their wheat. They had a soup kitchen for the poor. They had 8 newspapers in various languages, and the nobles would come to read it. My father gave a lot of tzedakah for goyim and for non-Jews and Jews alike, and he never asked for a loan to be recalled. He always used to say, "Don't worry, feed your family, and when you have money, you'll pay me back." My mother's family, my grandfather was a rabbi and a sofer. My mother knew my father since she was very little, and they got married. And they only had 2 wonderful years on the estate, and then everything went totally awry.
Can you please tell me your name?
Ruth Cohen.
When and where were you born?
In Mukachevo, Czechoslovakia, in 1930. It was a good family, mother and father, sister and brother, and myself. I went to a Zionist school, and we studied every subject in Hebrew.
Can you describe what Shabbat and the holidays were like in your home?
They were strictly adhered to in every possible way. It was always beautiful. The war started in 40 or 41, but my life changed in 38. Czechoslovakia was divided into Hungary, Romania, and everything changed.
My name is Magda Rosenbaum. I was born February 17, 1944 in Budapest, Hungary. I come from Hasidic grandparents. My grandparents from my mother's side had 18 children, and from my father's side, they had 9 children. My father and my mother met in Budapest in a restaurant. The waitress of the restaurant introduced them. Eventually, they married. My father was in business, and my mother was representing her father's business, which was, he had vineyards. As far as I know, they lived a nice Jewish life.
First of all, I heard on the radio that Hitler was coming to Vienna, and I wanted to be part and parcel of the crowd of over 100,000 people or so, shouting and screaming, ein Volk, ein Reich, ein Führer, one people, one empire, one leader. And I actually saw Hitler driving by in a car, and I was gone for a good 4 hours. When I did return home, my mother was furious. She wanted to know, where in the heck have you been? And I said to her proudly, I saw our Führer. And mother slapped me left and right and said, he is not ours, and don't you ever forget it. And it was a few days later, maybe within the next 10 days or so, that we abruptly left Austria and left for Belgium. The 10th of May of 1940, Germany attacked Belgium, Holland, and Luxembourg, and my father felt an obligation to go to his office that morning. And on the way to the office, there was an identity check. He produced his German passport, and he was promptly arrested by the Belgian authorities. My mother was able to locate him about 3 days later, and my father at that point said to my mother, get out of Belgium. We began fleeing towards France, and on arriving was put to sleep in an attic. My mother told me that it was only about 4 hours after our arrival that the air raid sirens went off in Paris and saying, come on, wake up, wake up. I didn't come to Paris to be bombed. I could have stayed in Brussels for that. And we left Paris, managed to get on one of the last trains to Bordeaux. My mother requested permission from the French police to allow us to remain in Bordeaux. And there was a man who said, you're going to take a train and go to a place called Oloron-Sainte-Marie. And on arrival, the train was surrounded by French gendarmes, and they loaded us onto trucks. We were dumped into a French detention camp called Gurs.
Well, the start of the war, the Russians were coming on the south, which was where we were, and the Germans were taking the northern part. My father ran to Romania. He did not think that women and children would be in any danger, but he didn't want to be conscripted into the Russian army. Unfortunately, the Russians had sealed the borders and arrested them all, my father included. They gave him 20 years hard labor in Russia. They threw us out of our house. After a year, when we were still under the Russians, we were able to connect with my father. And so we just had 2 pieces of correspondence twice, and then the Germans came.
When the Nazis came in 1939, they attacked the city. And it felt like there was fire coming out of the skies. There were bombs. People were running and screaming, dying, running, not knowing where we're going, but it was total bedlam. People told us to run to Russia. I remember a train taking us to Siberia. It was terribly crowded, but I remember, I was only 3 years old. Tried to get into the train was very difficult, and those who made it were lucky. Novosibirsk was a city that produced ammunition. And in order to keep the workers in a special place, it was a huge, tremendous big building. And each family got 1 room. There was no bathrooms. A roll of toilet paper, The first time I saw one was in Germany after the war. Disease was rampant. Filth was rampant.
After the war began, well, at first the Russians came in, but then they left, and the Romanians worked hand in hand with the Germans. And so a half a year after my father left, we were told to pack our bags. We were given 24 hours, and we were not allowed to take money, and we were not allowed to take any valuables. My grandmother decided she would sew money, take a chance, in her undergarments. My mother had hidden an album of books and money in our attic. My mother took along some of my father's clothing, bedding, and of course his talit. That's the only thing that I have of my dear father.
In 1933, Hitler had already come to power. Everything went wrong. My mother was expecting, and they heard already things weren't quiet. So they dressed as peasants, and they went by horse and buggy because they were arresting people on the trains. And they got to Lodz. My mother went out to look for food, and they were rounding up people, and she ended up in the Lodz ghetto. I had just been born. I was just literally an infant. My father found out from a neighbor that she was taken, and he got into the ghetto. Both of them were doing slave labor. One of the nobles happened to be a guard there, and when he saw my father and realized where he was, they finally got us out. By now, the communists had taken over the estate, and now the Nazis were marching in. Well, my father called an emergency meeting, and he sent wagons to the different shtetl for an emergency meeting, and they all came. He said, "We can't bow to anyone. We only have to trust in Hashem, and our only chance of survival is to go into the forest. I'm not promising that we'll survive, but at least we're not going to be slaves to any man."
How long were you able to stay in your home?
Until 44. We were told to get our stuff and go to a ghetto. We took one suitcase full of clothing, but it was a very short time. It was only 3 weeks. From there we went to the brick factory, which had this railroad tracks to bring the trains in. We went on the trains and we went to Auschwitz. We were totally crowded. We were hungry, we were thirsty, and we didn't get anything, any nourishment. My whole family was there. The first thing we noticed, all of us, when we saw it, when we got off the train, was a sign, Arbeit macht frei. Work frees you.
Work frees you.
It makes you free, which we understood, but not the right way. But first of all, as we got off, we were rushed off with sticks and dogs, Nazis screaming, get off, hurry up. And then we got to a point where Mengele was standing there, and he was selecting who should live and who should die. So he sent my mother and my siblings that way. That meant, at that time we didn't know, but that meant going to the gas chamber. We went straight to work, and my dad went that way also to work. Dr. Mengele was the one who did all the selections. He was also part of some experiments with mostly children. He was somebody everybody was afraid of.
My father said to me, "I told you, Mother, it's not a good time to have a baby." But she came from a big family, and she couldn't imagine not having children. So I was born, and by that time Hitler invaded Hungary, and they went into hiding. Their families were taken to Auschwitz, but they were young and strong, and they decided to get some fake papers and went into hiding, but they couldn't hide with a baby, so they gave me to the waitress who introduced them in the restaurant, and she took me home to the farm, and she told her mother to take care of me. Meanwhile, my father and my mother were in hiding. They found out that one of the 18 siblings of my mother survived in Romania. So they got on a van in Hungary, and on the way to Romania, a tank collided with them, and that's when my mother was killed, and my father was in a coma, and he survived.
In Gurs, we probably spent a total of about 6 weeks. My mother, as barracks chief, learned that a German army inspection team was coming to the camp. My mother and I, we stood at the gate, and as the German inspection team arrived, my mother rushed over to him and yelled as loud as she could, "Heil Hitler, I am a citizen of the great German Reich, I demand to be released." And the German officer looked at the passport and turned to the French camp commander and said, "You call taxi for madame. You pay for taxi. Taxi takes madame wherever she wants to go." And then people waved the cab down at the entrance of a city called Osh and said, "Don't go any further, the Germans are on the other side." My father was also at that point in Gurs. He developed heart trouble, and with that my mother succeeded in getting him a 30-day convalescent leave. And at least the family was together, if you will, and my father was able to earn a few pennies illegally by making some toys and by cleaning spark plugs. In the summer of 1942, I was sent to a Quaker summer camp. Things went well there until my father suddenly appeared, and he gave me a pouch, and I was suddenly overcome with a horrible feeling that I will never see my father again. And a few days later, on the 27th of August, the director of that summer camp, Mrs. Cavaillon, called me into her office and told me that I have some bad news to tell you. I just learned that your parents had been arrested. At that point, the gendarmes had come to arrest me. Mrs. Cavaillon had given me a terrible brew to swallow and convinced them that I was too sick to be moved. And they said, "We will be back to arrest him." Mrs. Cavaillon then wrote a letter to the Quakers and said, "I have a Jewish boy on my hand. The police have been here to arrest him." So the Quakers wrote and said, "You're in luck. We've just received permission to send 500 orphaned children to the United States." We managed to get to Marseille, and she turned me over to the Quaker office 4 days after I arrived in Marseille. The Germans block all ship traffic in and out of Marseille. I was at this point bounced from one facility to another until the Quakers could try to figure out what are we going to do with these 500 Jewish children. And on the 15th of January, I find myself arriving in the middle of the night in a place called Le Chambon, where I was met by a young man by the name of Daniel Trocmé. I was in a part of France that was predominantly Protestant. Their pastor, André Trocmé, inspired them on the day when France surrendered by telling them, "Now is the time to fight the enemy with the weapons of the Spirit." And I owe the Quakers, I owe the people of Le Chambon my own life. I wouldn't be here talking to you guys today if it hadn't been for the good luck that I experienced of falling into the hands of people who did the right thing.
They marched in with great fanfare. They immediately put in very strict laws, particularly against the Jews. Jewish star on the house, on every piece of clothing that we had. The Germans started taking groups of young people to go out into the fields, and they did some job, and they came back in the afternoon. And so this they did a couple of times, and sort of to get us used to the idea, I suppose. And then they said that there was a big job up the road. There was an old camp, Polish military camp, an old one. And they said that they needed to wrap young trees with burlap because they would die. So a lot of people came. They even, came voluntarily to help. And as usual, like with the other groups, they would take them up in the morning and we waited for them in the evening and nobody came back. When they came to the camp, there were open graves with sticks over them. And they were told to undress and lay on that, and they were shot. As they were shot, they dropped into the grave. And everybody was thinking and asking, each other, how can we run? Where can we run? So sure enough, there was a call that they needed a certain group of people for work in Germany. My mother put me in with one farmer. She and my sister went to another. She paid the lady in advance to keep us during the time when they were looking for people. All through the day, I waited. I didn't know what was happening. After a while, my mother did come to get me. She said, we're never going to separate again. And then she told me what happened to her. So they went to a priest and purchased false identity papers. They hoped that we could pass as Catholics. The people that helped us buy the papers, they took us to the railway station. We were going to Yaroslavl, Juden-free they called it. As we were traveling, my mother said to me, the man that was sitting next to me and we were talking, pushed me very hard because he realized who we were not who we were saying we are. And I had no choice, and I had to admit that we were Jewish. He said that he will have to take us and hand us over to the Gestapo. She gave him the tickets for the luggage, gave him all the money, and I even promised the coats on our backs for just one thing. She didn't want to be separated from the children. But as we were walking, she said, "Why do you want us on your conscience?" He stopped, turned around, and took a few dollars, gave it back to my mother, and said, "From bad to worse, going now with nothing." And but he left us. She looked, and there was a little cafe, so she said, "Let's get in there. Let's get some milk for your sister." And then she started looking around and asking the customers there if there was somebody who knew about some place where we could get lodgings. So somebody got up and said, "Oh, I know there's a lady there, not too far. She's a washerwoman and she takes lodgers." My mother said to her, "I have no money." First of all, that was the first thing she said. "But tomorrow I can go to work and whatever I find, and I bring to you for taking us in, for hosting us." And she looked us up and down and said, "Okay." And so she walked into the German military camp and asked for a job. Luck would have it, they gave her a job, peeling potatoes for the troop. We just carried on. My mother daily, went to work. I went to school. I went to communion, knowing full well I was Jewish, but this was necessary.
In 1941, Hitler attacked that part of Russia we were in, and people were running. My father was taken away to fight the Russians, and my mother was given the job of washing pots. My brother and I, we were always starving. So there was a broken pane in the back of the kitchen. And whenever nobody was watching, she would throw out to us pieces of potato that was stuck to the pot, piece of carrot. And that's how we survived, with a piece of black bread. I can't remember how many months my father came back. I guess he was too sick to be in the army, to send him back. In order to be living in that room, you had to work for the government, okay? And in the government, told you what to do and how to do it. Because if you don't, you lose your piece of bread that you get twice a day, and you're being thrown out of your room. And my father's job was to be a watchman. And one time, he was watching a whole trainload of cabbages, and he told all the Jews that he knew to come and steal that day. And he was watching the cabbages, okay? My brother and I, that was 6, he was 8, we went to steal cabbages. We were caught with the KGB. They took us to my father, and they said, "Do you know these children?" My father said, "No, we never saw them." And then they asked us, "Is that your father?" We said, "No," because we could not tell the truth. Now, he wasn't a stupid man, the KGB man, but he understood, what is he going to do with us, two kids? So he yelled at us, and he said, "Throw those cabbages down again." So we threw them down, and he left. We followed him. And when he was out of sight, we went back to take those cabbages.
How long were you in Novosibirsk for?
From 3 to 10, 6.5 to 7 years almost. I tried going to school. I had to run away from the Russian boys who were beating us up because we were Jews. And I learned very quickly to run to a Christian cemetery. When I saw them coming, I would run to hide from them.
My mother put on layers of clothing on me. I had a backpack, and we didn't know if we'll ever get back to our home. We didn't know where we were going. We were just gathered in a big hall, and were going to be put on trains. And for some reason, my uncle, had not been drafted. And he found out that the Romanian soldiers took bribes, and they would take us on barges to a ghetto, because we were headed for Pretoria, which was a death camp. They took us to this very primitive area, clay huts they lived in. The family took us in. They were a family of 4, a potbelly stove that gave the heat, no electricity. They had 1 bedroom. And here we were 9 people, so 13 people. Mother's sister she was taken to labor every day, but the 2 soldiers picked her up. My mother didn't go, and that's how she brought some food. We didn't have rations or anything. My cousin was really a growing boy. He was crying. He said, "I am so hungry." And my aunt, Alav Shalom, she said, "Why can't you be like other kids and go on the black market and steal?" He said, "One of the commandments is thou shalt not steal." Even though he was hungry, he just couldn't do it. I saw people, at my age, at that time, to see death on the streets. But as a child, a little rock became a ball. We managed to make some kind of a jump rope to try to forget. And also my dear grandmother had tachrichim, which in the Jewish religion you are buried with special, just white shroud. And she had them sewn right in that room. Everything took place in that room. And I asked her, "What is it for?" And she said, "My dear child, I am probably going to die soon, and these are the clothes that I want to wear, and you are the only grandchild here now because my aunt had left. So when I do die, I want you to light the candle for me." She did die shortly after. She had cancer.
In the ghetto, did you ever feel scared or hopeless?
Hopeless, no. As a child, you're not hopeless. You always have hope. And what really got me through is my mother's love. I was never separated from my mother. That was very lucky for me and for her.
How long were you in the ghetto?
In the ghetto, 3 years.
My father's aunt was a famous herbalist, and she taught him everything about forest law, what was poisonous, what was edible, what roots could be used for medicine. She taught him astronomy. She taught him how to tell time by the sun and the moon. Now, the Nazis usually were afraid to go into the forest because they would get ambushed, but planes used to strafe the forest constantly. And so my father taught them how to make zemlyankes, they're called, and that's like a dugout underground. So sometimes it was easier to build down there because you had to have a shovel, you had to have a saw, you had to keep digging because sometimes when they would start strafing the forest, you had to keep running. You couldn't stay in the same camp twice. And in the zemlyankes underground, they would put a fire with a flue, but it was getting harder and harder. You had to go deeper and deeper and deeper into the forest. There were, I would say, about 150, 200 people. And slowly, either they went off on their own or they joined other groups. Now it was getting too dangerous to keep them all together. There was a Baptist who found him in the forest, and he saw my father. I thought you were killed. He says, listen, is there anything I can do for you? I can get you food. So my father says, I don't need food from you. If you can get me information when the Nazis are going to get through the forest and when they're going on maneuvers or whatever, that'll be better than any food you can give me. And he was good to his word, and he would come and said, hurry up, you have to leave. So they had to keep leaving. But the forest was a very dangerous place. There were different Jewish partisan groups cropping up all over. And my father realized that he'd have to farm out the people. There's no more that he could take care of them. But nobody would take my father and mother and me. Nobody wanted to take a baby in the partisans. So my mother said, look, we took care of these people for a year and a half. We'll take care of ourselves. Well, one time they're sitting, and out of nowhere, a group of Polish partisans robbed my father, and they took his horse. So my father leaves my mother alone, and she's in the zemlyanka. She hears crunching on the leaves, and so she peeks through some, little place, and in the moonlight, she sees this huge Belgian horse standing there. She ties him to the birch tree, and suddenly, as the sun was starting to come up, she hears my father's bird call, and she knows that he's coming. And he takes a look, and there's my little mother with this magnificent horse. She says, how did you get this horse? She says, I didn't get him. God sent him to us. Meanwhile, a descent of paratroopers came from Russia, and they had to blow up a train that was going to the front. And so my father says, look, he says, I don't need a brigade. I don't need a lot of people. He says, I'm not going like a conquering general. I'm going like a thief in the night. And so he says, I need 10 men and 10 white sheets. So they run, to not to have the signal light on them. They get there, they quickly put it down on the track. The train is coming, and they start shooting from all sides. My father got shot in his shoulder. Now he's in the partisan group. They took him in with my mother. They promised that they'll take care of my mother and me. The commander, Miranovich, he liked my father very much, and he asked my father, do you want to go? He wanted to send him to the demolition section. He says, look, wherever you send me, I'll be fine, don't worry. And that was their life in the forest. It was a hell on earth.
These 30,000 people were taken to one specific camp called the Zeelager. We were supposed to go in and then get killed, which didn't happen. So they did not tattoo us, they didn't waste the ink or the labor on us. We got there in May, and it was, at night was absolutely freezing, and during the day it was absolutely hot. In each barrack there were 1,000 women. We stayed in a bed that was for 24 people. We had some coffee in the morning, and at night we had a soup kind of thing with a slice of bread. Every barrack had to stand what they called Zeelappell every morning, early in the morning, 4 or 5 o'clock. So we would be standing, I don't know how many in a row, and the whole barrack would be standing there. And Nazis would be walking between the rows, and if they wanted to take someone out of the line, they just touched them on the shoulder with a stick. You had to get out of there. Immediately they were taken to the gas chambers.
Do you think you could describe your typical day in Auschwitz for us?
Well, mine was very special because I was one of 13 girls who were working, altogether out of 30,000 women. I was a messenger, so I was standing at the gate, and whatever messages had to go from the gate to any of the barracks, or from any of the barracks to the gate. We were called and we had to deliver the messages. Working was a very good thing, because otherwise you just languished all day long. So I was working from morning to night. As I was a messenger standing by the gate one day, we heard terrible cries. There was a street here that led to the gas chambers. As they approached us, the crying was louder and louder. And then we saw a truck with, I don't know, 100 or more children, gypsy children, and they turned down to the gas chambers. It was actually one of the most horrible stories that I can even now think of. One day we got a message from my dad, who was also in Auschwitz, that we should come and meet him. He was going to carry blankets on a road that we would see if we stay at the barbed wire fence. And it was wonderful to see him. We waved to each other. We couldn't talk, it was too far away, but we did wave to each other, and that was great. I was sick. I got typhoid fever and was sent to the little house, which was called the infirmary, with other sick people. And when the German officers came in to select people who were really, really sick and take them to the crematorium, they hid me. Both the nurses and the doctor was responsible for that. So I survived that.
How long did you remain in Auschwitz?
7 months.
Where were you sent to from Auschwitz?
To Nuremberg, Germany.
How long were you in Nuremberg for?
Probably 3.5 months. We were 500 women. We started working. We were winding wire on a spool for an airplane until even the bunker was bombed, and then they had to send us away from there. So they sent us to another city with the same manufacturer, Holishov, in Czechoslovakia. Again, we worked the same way until the end of the war.
The tank ran over the van that my parents were traveling in, and my mother was killed, and my father was in a coma. And when he woke up from a coma, he remembered that he had a child on a farm, and he went back to the farm to claim me. And the farmer's wife said, "That's my child. I baptized her, she calls me Mom. You can't have her, this is my child." So he went back to the old home and he found some silver that was hidden. And he brought it to the farmer's wife. And she said, "I can't give her, she's my child." So my father brought the police. The police said, "You have no proof." So my father said, "Just a minute, I have to talk to my boss." And he started to daven mincha. And as he was saying Shemona Esrei, he started screaming, "A birthmark." My baby had a birthmark on her tummy. And so they undressed me, and the baby, me, had a birthmark And so the police said, this is his child, give her back. So my father took me back, and he remarried. And I thought that my stepmother was my mother until I was 9. And then he told me that I am from his first wife. And many years later, one of my uncles saved some photographs, and that's the first time I saw my mother's face. So I'm a painter. I was an art teacher here, and so I painted her. So I got to know my mother a little bit more. I remember when I asked my father when I was a little girl, why don't we go visit my grandparents? So he said, in Yiddish, he said, "Nicht kan Yiddische Sach." It's not a Jewish thing to have grandparents. And it's true. Jewish children did not have grandparents, unfortunately.
I remember the most when she said that her cousin wouldn't steal because the Torah says not to, even though he was starving, because that's what kept his faith.
She brought a talit that belonged to her father, which is important because it's showing how they wanted to keep being Jewish and to bring their Jewish things with them.
Faith helped people during a difficult time. We're talking about a world of people that were faced with questions that, please God, you will never be faced with. I think the lessons that you'll learn from it are also applicable to you. As we talk about what does it mean to have faith or a struggle with faith in the Holocaust. Does anybody know of a question that was asked to a rabbi in the Holocaust?
Are we allowed to eat not kosher if they're all sinner?
I have nothing to eat. They're giving me this food. Am I allowed to eat it in order to live? What do we often say to questions like that? Yeah, if you can survive, your life is the most important, right? Other questions you've seen? Something, yeah.
Yeah, like why? Why would Hashem do this?
Right, of course. The theological questions, the questions about God. Where is God in the Holocaust? Why would God do this to us? Right? Very important questions that were asked. One of the most famous questions ever asked is there were Jewish people in the camps that were in charge, and they were tasked with putting people where they needed to get for selection. And somebody once asked them, listen, you've selected 100 people that are going to the gas chamber. My son is amongst them. Can I pay you, bribe you, to get him out? And the answer was, yes, you just have to put somebody in their place. Because I promised the Nazis 100 people. Are you allowed to take somebody in place of your own child? It's one of the most famous questions ever asked in this kind of responsa literature.
In Rabbi Tobolowsky's Emunah session, one of the things that I remembered is that he talked about if you see like a Holocaust survivor that is not religious anymore, you can't like judge them or anything because what they've been through.
Some of the rabbis of this time were searching for a more creative response to help people feel, A, your life is important, live. But B, hold on to the spirit which also keeps you going.
It felt really meaningful to me because they actually had to deal with these type of problems that we have never actually had to experience, and how they were normal people too, that they had to go through this much just for being Jewish.
The people of Le Chambon created a false identity factory, and I was one of those who was given a French name. I became Pierre Fesson instead of Pierre Feigl. Place of birth became Auch, Gers in France. I got instructions to take a train, and I got off in a small place called Viry. So at the railway station, we were met by people smugglers. We got instructions about how to cross the border, and when the guards were being changed, I climbed over the first a row of barbed wire fences and up over the second fence, and there a Swiss soldier stood, and I was now arrested by the Swiss authorities. I pulled out my baptismal certificate, which someone had sewn into the lining of my jacket. And he looked at it and he said, "Ah, mais tu es catholique, bienvenue en Suisse, you're a Catholic, welcome to Switzerland." I gave the Swiss authorities the name of a business associate of my father. They contacted that family, and that family decided to take me in, and I found myself in safety in Bern. So for me, that was the end of the war.
One morning, we woke up. There was a complete silence. Suddenly, there was a tremendous bang. It was a bomb that broke over the little house, which is an old little house that we were in. And I got hit by shrapnel in my hand. Got to the hospital. They told us that the Germans left and that the Russians are coming in. And then my father decided to send my cousin to get us out of Poland. The Russians apparently had made a sort of semi-official deal. The Poles were not allowed to leave. You had to be kind of proof that you were who you were. So now we had to prove that we were Jewish, that we want to get out. We didn't have any papers. We didn't look Jewish. But she eventually reminded them that she was champion swimmer. She was champion of Poland under the name of Olga Schreiber. They remembered. So finally they accepted us. You see, then it was all right to be Jewish. So. And then we were told that we had two options. We could go either to settle, in England or Palestine. My parents decided England.
They were killing Jews in Poland. So my father smuggled us out from Szczecin to East Berlin on a fishing boat that lasted 11 days. At the same time as we reached East Berlin, there was a truck waiting for us to take us to West Berlin. And we were wounded up in the American zone. And we stayed in camps. They're called displaced persons camps, TP camps. I went to school there in an attic with all the other Jewish children, and we went to learn Hebrew. And we were there for almost 3 years. We belonged to Bnei Akiva, a young man coming from Israel. He came one day with an army truck, and all the kids were taken into the army truck. We were singing Hebrew and Russian songs, 1948, with flags of Israel flying. The message was, you were still alive. You didn't kill all of us. We felt such pride that we survived the war. And we were there until 1949. And from there we went to the United States.
While in the ghetto, also at the end of the war, Frontline was coming close. There was a lot of bombing that we heard, and the owner of the little cottage that we were in, he said, let's all go to a friend. He had a basement, and we all went there. And there was one teenager who couldn't stand the noise anymore, and he went out, and he came back. Everybody was, thrilled to see them, and he said, "It's over, it's over." And everybody said, "What's over?" "The war is over." And everybody was just ecstatic. We got on a train and went back home because we wanted to see who survived and who didn't.
Finally, the war is over, and they figure they'll go back to lunch to their house. There are squatters there, so now they're living on the street. My father came to a side street and realized that must have been a bakery at one time. There was an oven there, And above the bakery was a bombed out top that looks like you can make a room there. So he still had some gold pieces, and he got some workers, and they made a tiny little room upstairs. So he started baking bread. People told us that we met after the war, when bread was worth its weight in gold, your father gave it away for free. He says, what could I do? He says, I was glad I could feed my own family.
Can you describe the day of liberation?
I was actually liberated twice, 2 days apart. The first was by white Russian partisans. The partisans opened the door and told us that we are now free, but we should not leave the camp because it's too dangerous outside. 2 days later, the American soldiers came in and they liberated us completely. It was the very last day of the war. My sister was with me. My dad left messages for whoever is alive to come home. He is at home waiting for us.
I remember the happiest day of my childhood. My brother was born, my half-brother. And before that, all the people around me were crying. And all of a sudden, on his breast, they were dancing and singing. And I didn't understand what's going on. All these sad people who lost their parents, their families, they were singing and dancing on the street in Hungary. And I thought, just because my brother was born, they make such a big deal. I found out that the state of Israel was born. So all the survivors were so exuberant, they were dancing that it happened in their lifetime, that we have a state. And we lived in Budapest, in the beautiful city of Budapest. And we were there during the Hungarian Revolution. And I saw some terrible things on the street. People were killed, and it was very, very traumatic. I was in Hungary till 1957, when I was about 12, 13 years old. We tried to leave Hungary during the revolution, but we were caught by the border of Hungary and Austria, and we were sent back. And then we tried again, and then we were imprisoned. And finally, we managed to get a passport, and we came out legally.
It's important to me to pass down stories because if we don't know how they got here, we don't know how we're here. How did somebody live through just a horrific event? If we don't know that, why are we here?
Holocaust distortion is different from Holocaust denial. Denial is easily defined as negating that the Holocaust took place. Distortion is different and is the act of altering the accuracy of historical record, in many cases to make a specific population look as if they were not a perpetrator. In all cases, it brings a false narrative into the historiography of the Holocaust. Your interviews are going to preserve this history for the time when there will no longer be any living witness to this history to combat denial or distortion, who normally would have been able to say, this is what happened, I was there.
I feel since we're the last generation who gets to interview the survivors, it makes me feel really sad because these are horrible things, and the fact that still people in the world don't believe it happened, it's a lot of pressure that we have to carry on this entire legacy because the people who witnessed it won't be here anymore to tell their stories.
It's important that we don't repeat what happened in the past so that we shouldn't have a war in the future. Also because this is Jewish history and we should learn each other's history.
I think if I were to show a Holocaust denier the documentary that we just made, I think it would really switch their mindset because it's coming from an actual person that went through everything.
In January of 1945, newspaper articles appeared in the Free Swiss press. The Soviets came across a death camp called Auschwitz. That is the time when I had to come to the conclusion it must have been the fate of my parents. I didn't get a confirmation of that until many years later. When I arrived in the United States in July of 1946, I lived in what was my grandmother's pantry. And my grandmother remembered me as an 11-year-old, so I got instruction I was to be in bed by 9 o'clock at night. I wasn't supposed to go out, especially don't go out with American girls. They might have some crazy ideas. And here I am in a free country. I'm 17 and a half. I wanted to live and enjoy life.
1953, they were sending a team to Israel for the Maccabeah Games. And of course, when they chose me, I was so happy. It's a wonderful miracle, Israel, for me. And that's where I met my husband, who was a Bulgarian refugee. He decided that we need to go to America for at least a job that he was offered for 1 year in Palo Alto, and that was 72.
There was an amount of people you're allowed to come to this country, and we were given permission to come to this country. I came to this country when I was 13. We went to Pittsfield, Massachusetts, a very small Jewish community there. My father opened up a small fruit store. We lived behind that small fruit store with some given furniture, and he took me to Bis Yaakov. But Baruch Hashem, I managed. I was young enough to learn the language, and I went to school to Bis Yaakov, and from there I became a teacher. I'm teaching Hebrew to 4-year-olds.
We saw things were going bad. We had to get out, so we had falsified papers to say that we were born in Poland. We had to pass different borders. We had to hop on different trains. It took us 3 months, and we got to Germany. It was a displaced persons camp. In 1949, when our quota came up to go to the United States, we were in an army transport type of a ship. The only time we went up on board was when we were getting close to New York Harbor and seeing the Statue of Liberty and knowing that we could finally practice our religion.
We went by boat to America. It was called the General Mauer. Then we come to Ellis Island. Meanwhile, my brothers had contracted the German measles, and so they were quarantined on the boat for 3 horrible, boring months. And so somehow my aunt was able to finagle the super, and she borrowed money from her cousins, and we went into a 3-room apartment. But it was the happiest times.
Can you describe your journey to United States?
We came by ship. We happened to arrive on the first day of Passover. So we had about 700 survivors on board with a huge Seder. Stopped at the Statue of Liberty Friday morning. And then we got here. So we saw New York City, which was quite beautiful. Still is, by the way.
It was very hard to get into the United States. My family stayed in England, but I had 3 sisters of my mother survived from the 18 children, and they wanted me to come to America and get a Jewish education. So they brought me out. And I went to Williamsburg in Brooklyn, and I was very surprised that that's America, because people spoke mostly Yiddish and Hungarian. So I thought, what's going on here? Is this America? I was 16 when I came to America.
I joined the U.S. Air Force in June of 1947, and I found myself assigned to Air Technical Intelligence, and I was put to work translating captured German documents. Then, when I got out of the Air Force, I then embarked on a number of careers. Ultimately, I wound up in the Office of Secretary of Defense. In 1954, I married a young girl whose parents also were Jewish refugees. Finally, in 1990, I retired in Florida with my wife, and I now live in a retirement community.
Nobody wanted to hear my story when, after the war. They all wanted to forget. When I got to Israel, they said, we don't go backwards, we go forwards. Forget it. When I came here, nobody was interested. So I didn't talk. My family is my 2 sons, one of which is in London, in England, and one of which is here.
I got married in 1956, and I have children and grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren. My granddaughter is now a grandmother herself. Her daughter got married and had 2 babies.
So you're their great-great-grandma?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Hashem kept me alive, kept me safe. And I have grandchildren living in Eretz Israel and great-grandchildren.
My family was in the Bronx. I had a full scholarship to Brooklyn College, and I was very fortunate. I met my Basherton when I was 18 years old. We had a beautiful marriage. He was a wonderful person. We raised 3 daughters. I taught at the Yiddish, Chaim Weizmann Yiddish Hebrew School, and I became principal there. The Holocaust Museum. I've been working there for almost 15 years. I happen to be translating their diaries of everyday life in camps. I see how important it is.
When I got married, I became a Rebbitzin, so we moved away. And I started teaching at the Hebrew school to help my husband out. And then they came to me and they said they heard I speak Russian. Would I teach the Russian kids? I helped a lot of people, get jobs, and the Russians and I really got along beautifully. It was really wonderful to see how successful a lot of them became. My husband was a rabbi, so he retired, and we moved to Silver Spring, so I'm not far from 2 of my children, but we all get together, and the cousins are very close. Thank God.
What did you appreciate most about life in America after the war?
Everything. School, life, family. I had my husband, 3 children. Unfortunately, one of them died, and I have 8 grandchildren.
I worked as a bookkeeper, and at night I went to art school. So I managed to earn my living and to pay for school. My family, Baruch Hashem, is a wonderful family. I have a son and a daughter. They both live in Florida, and they have children. And I'm very grateful.
I'm feeling a lot less nervous because before I was pretty nervous. I didn't want to trigger any emotions or make her feel bad or anything.
After the interview, I'm feeling very well informed and happy that I got the chance to listen to Mrs. Peabody's story.
I think I would use my documentary to look back on. I would want to show it to other people so that they can hear their stories and feel what I felt as I listened.
I feel very inspired and thankful for the things that I have and how lucky I am. And I have a better understanding about struggles that other people have gone through, and it has brought in more gratitude throughout everything in my life.
I feel quite relief, and I feel very inspired to continue to learn about the Holocaust, to prevent it happening again, and quite sad for Mr. Feigl, who went through terrible things.
The message for your generation is to have faith. When things are difficult, just stay with it and believe that things will turn out okay.
I think it's important to keep talking about the Holocaust because not necessarily that it's going to happen again, I really hope it doesn't, but I think more of to respect people in general. Like, you should never judge somebody based on how they look, what religion they are, anything, it doesn't matter. You should never judge a person or hate anybody. So I think that's one big reason why we should keep telling the story.
My message is never to forget what happened to our people. Take tremendous pride in Israel. Interview your parents and grandparents, because there's so many things that I didn't ask, things that they didn't want to talk about. When good people do nothing, evil triumphs.
I think that it's important to keep interviewing survivors because it spreads out a message through multiple generations that you should not be a bystander.
The message is to be proud Jews. Jews don't run and chase and hit and kill and burn and gas. You don't kill 1 billion children. We don't do that. It's not us. The challenges you're going to meet are going to be tremendous. Will you be able to stand up to them? Will you have the strength?
My message to my generation would be to make sure that we tell the stories to keep them alive, because we are probably going to be like the last generation to hear them, and we need to make sure that we can remember them and tell them to our kids.
Stand up for whatever you see is wrong, strongly. Don't just be a bystander and watch things go on without fighting back, and make certain that none of this or any of the other atrocities that are happening will happen again.
The one thing I remember the most is what she said that she would say to our generation, which is to stand up to what you feel is wrong, which really moves me because it means that she remembers how hard it was, and she wants to make sure that other people stand up to it so that nobody has to go through what she went through.
Be open to other religions. Know about them. We're all really God's children. Jew or non-Jew, they bleed the same, they have families. Speak up for them. I think the doors should be open to immigrants. This is the land of immigration. They shouldn't close them. Be an advocate of freedom of religion, freedom of speech. Try to make this world a better place to live in. And be a mensch and do the right thing.
I think the message to my generation now would be to remember to always be kind, because one act of kindness can escalate and make someone's entire year just better.
And this message that I can give you is this. If you listen to my story, you found out that I was taught to hate Jews. We are all born with a blank mind. And from the moment of our birth, we absorb what we hear, see, smell, and taste, and it is implanted in our mind. This is something that's very difficult to overcome. The next time that you see someone being bullied, it behooves you to stop it right then and there, because it is the right thing to do. And everyone, no matter what you believe, you know darn well the difference between right and wrong.
I always say to please put a hand out to people who need help. And I just feel that a good person is a good person. Doesn't matter color or creed or religion. Everybody has a right to life, and as long as it doesn't hurt others. And I think that the only thing that will help is if we can come together and make it friendly. And yes, there are differences, but we could live together. We should be able to live together.